for those people that are not from Manchester, welcome on behalf of Chabad Golders Green and the Herschel White Centre. My name is Michelle Siffer. I run the Herschel White Centre, and this is an extremely passionate project for me. Obviously, people know the last few months we've been at the forefront of trying to offer things over lockdown, and as things nothing ever happens by chance, and I think it's not by chance that this week more than ever we need an evening like Women of Courage. We're all fed up. The government's just announced another lockdown. What does that mean? The virus is growing. I have a personal interest because I have my own story, which I'm not going to tell tonight, but I lost my husband maybe coming up to 11 months ago, and women have to be really strong. And I thought, Baruch Hashem, as the years gone by, I didn't go through what people did with COVID. I was very prepared when my husband died. We went through a lot together as a family. We knew that he was going to pass away, and we were all with him till the end. And I'm very grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for that. But COVID hit and challenges, and then I saw how amazing Chabad Golders Green has sharing a WhatsApp with Hani, and I was like, she keeps getting these amazing speakers. I've got to call her up. I was like, Hani, I want to do this thing. I don't want to do another self-help evening or help yourself or whatever deep breathing meditation. I want to speak to real women that have been through real challenges and that people can learn from them. And Hani and Mushki and the team there, although a bit frustrating working with us in Herschel Wise because we're like very slow at sending Zoom details and stuff, came up with the most amazing speakers, and we came up with this title, Women of Courage, which we hope will be the beginning of a lot of work together. Obviously, we can't see everybody, but if you have questions at the end, you can put them in the chat box. And welcome, and we just hope that everybody will grow. And I asked Hani to introduce Esty because I haven't focused so much on her story. I want to hear it myself. I love listening to anyone's story that's been through things. I can always emulate and understand, because even though my life, everybody's story is different, when you've been through something, there's always something that you can touch on somebody else. And there's just one message from my story that I wanted to give, is that when I spoke last time during lockdown, in the middle of it, I had a memory of something when my husband was very sick, when I was falling apart and I'd been wearing a nightie for days and really, like, he was getting worse and worse, and I was caring for him and thinking that it would never ever end. And in the middle of this talk that I gave last time during lockdown, I thought, oh my gosh, obviously we had a very sad end, but I'm past that and I got through it. And one of my biggest messages that I always like to do is what it said on the ring of Shlomo HaMelech, that this too will pass. So any of you that are really struggling what's going on and thinking it's never going to be over and whatever, it will, because I know when I was in the depth of the worst part of what I was going through with my husband before he died, I'm looking at myself a year later, and obviously I lost him, and it's very hard and hard for my children, but it passed, and I haven't gone back to that place where I was at that time, that depth of despair. So I just wanted to hand that over. And sorry, Khani, it was more than 2 minutes. And I'm going to hand over to Khani, who's become a very good friend now. And we hope to do much more projects together to introduce Rebbetzin Esty. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And we should all take the kayach, and you should go Michael al Chayil. I'm not going to give away any of Esty's story because Esty's a very eloquent speaker, and she will say it all herself. I just want to introduce Esty, Rebbetzin Esty, for those who don't know her. Rebbetzin Esty has been a teacher and a lecturer for the last 18 years. She's taught in seminaries all over Eretz Yisrael, and now she is, we're lucky that she's living in England, even though with COVID, it doesn't really matter where you live because it's all on Zoom. Rebbetzin Esty teaches many classes on spiritual growth, character, building relationships, as well as running support groups for parents, as well as for parents with disabled children. Esty and her husband, Rabbi Yanni Hamilton, who himself is a psychotherapist, have been benched with 6 children. One is a disabled child, and they currently reside in the UK. And you can hear her lectures on online as well. Without any further ado, Rebbetzin Esty.
Hi, everyone. Even though I have been giving Zoom shiurim now for about 6 months, and I have been doing it around the world. I think the furthest one I've done is in Sydney and Melbourne, and I've done it all from my dining room table. So that's amazing. I tell my children before they go to school, Mommy's going to Australia today, and they come back and I'm still here. So it's amazing. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I do have a story that happened to me this time last year, and it is an amazing, amazing story. It is almost unbelievable. So if it hadn't happened to me, I don't know if I would have believed it. And it's something that I want to share with you because I feel that my whole story is about how the community really carried me through this, through the time of my illness and my miraculous recovery. And I also want to speak a bit about how we can all work on building our emunah muscle. That means before a hardship, we want to be able to build our muscle of emunah so that when hardships come, we are not totally flabbergasted or falling apart. And one of the secrets of this is to get to know the story of your life, and to try and understand every incident that happens to you as really a message from Hashem. So I want to just tell you a little bit about what happened to me this time last year. So it was August of last year, and I am a mother of 6, as Hani mentioned, and it was the end of August, a few days before school was starting, and I suddenly started to feel very unwell. I started to get symptoms of the flu symptoms, and like most women, I probably wouldn't have gone to the doctor, because who's got time to go to the doctor? But I did feel that my children were going to school very soon. I didn't have time to be ill, and I needed that time to buy their uniform and to go get their school bags and to get everything ready. So I went to the doctor and I said, listen, I feel very ill. And they checked me out and they said, oh, we think that you have tonsillitis. And they gave me antibiotics and they sent me home. And I was very happy with this diagnosis, because I get tonsillitis when I'm very run down. And at the end of the summer holidays, I was very run down. And I knew within 24, 48 hours, I would be fine. Antibiotics really kills it for me. And I'd be up and ready to do all the things that I needed to do that week, really. And a few days later, I remember I went to the doctor on Monday, and then I went again to the doctor on Friday. And I said, I have never felt so sick in my life. The antibiotics have done nothing for me. And I don't know what's wrong with me. Please help me. So a different doctor this time looked down my throat and checked me out and said, listen, maybe it's not bacterial, maybe it's viral, in which case antibiotics won't help. We'll take some blood tests, but it's Friday today, so we'll only get the results on Monday. You know, our advice to you is to rest and relax. So like most Jewish mothers, I laughed at the idea of resting and relaxing over Shabbos, over the weekend. But the truth is, I spent that whole Shabbos in bed. I could barely move. And it was really, really so difficult. It was almost unbelievable. And then Sunday morning, I woke up and I had a terrible pain in my stomach. So I called my doctor and I said, I have a terrible pain in my stomach, and I described the pain. And he said to me, you know what, this maybe could be appendicitis. It could be that you've been ill now for a whole week and you're not getting better. And it could be that we've all diagnosed you wrong. And because you're in so much pain that you can't stand up straight, he said, I think that you should call Hatzalah and go to the hospital, just in case it's surgical. And if it's surgical, you're going to need surgery immediately, and it's an emergency. And if you call Hatzalah, the Hatzalah ambulance will take you straight into the emergency room. You don't have to wait in the waiting room. And he said, in fact, I know the head of the surgical team in the hospital. I'm going to call them and tell them to expect you. I want them to check you out as soon as you come in. So here it is, Sunday afternoon. I felt very ridiculous, so I called Hatzalah. My kids thought it was hilarious that Hatzalah was coming for mommy, and they strapped me into the bed, and my kids took a picture of me in the Hatzalah bed because they thought it was so funny, and nobody predicted how seriously ill I was. And I didn't even think I was. I went to the hospital in like the clothes that I was wearing, and I was holding my phone. I didn't take a bag, I didn't pack anything, I didn't prepare anything, nothing. So a week before this, I was totally fine. And even that morning, Sunday morning, I made breakfast for my kids. And Sunday afternoon, I was in the Hatzalah ambulance. I thought it was much ado about nothing, but I really was in a lot of pain. And I wanted to get checked out as quickly as possible so I could come back home as quickly as possible so that I could be there for my children. They were starting school in 2-3 days' time. I'd already been ill for a whole week. And it was just really a precaution, I thought. I was very, very mistaken. I went into hospital. And the first thing they do when you come into hospital is they give you blood tests. And they gave me 2 different medications to take down my fever. They gave me blood tests. And then they said, listen, the surgical team know that you're here. And they'll come down, check you out when they're ready, which could be another hour. We've done all we can do for you here in the actual bay. We're going to put you out into the waiting room. And you can wait in the waiting room for the surgical team to call you because we have other emergencies coming in. So they put me in a wheelchair. I was so weak, I couldn't stand up straight, and I was in so much pain. They put me in the waiting room in a wheelchair with my husband pushing the wheelchair. I was sitting in the waiting room, maybe 100 people who were waiting to be seen. And we were sitting there for about an hour. Suddenly, a doctor comes running into the emergency room. And he calls out very loudly, who is Esty Hamilton? So my husband puts up his hand and says, she's here, she said. He said, she's not allowed to be in this room. And they quickly wheel me into a side room, like a room that there's nobody in with a door. And he grabs a nurse, a random nurse on the way and says, I need you, come with me. And they put me in this room. And then he said to me, have you had chemotherapy recently? So I said, have I had chemotherapy recently? I said, I had a baby in this hospital 3 months ago. I was fine until 1 week ago. Why would you ask me if I had chemotherapy? So he said to me, I've been a doctor here for 20 years. I have never seen somebody come into the hospital with 0.00 white blood cells. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not a doctor, nor have I ever been in the medical profession. I didn't know what he was talking about. And I now have a much better idea now that I've been through everything I've been through. Basically, your white blood cells protect you from all germs. So every time you touch a surface, there's a germ. Every time somebody sneezes, there's a germ. Now that we've been through coronavirus, the whole world knows much more about germs. But this time last year, there wasn't coronavirus. The world was still relatively normal. And basically, a person who doesn't have white blood cells cannot live. And the reason why they cannot live is because germs are attacking everybody at all times, and your white blood cells are fighting these germs all the time. So the truth is, you don't get ill from anything unless it's very serious, unless your own body can't fight it, and then you have to take antibiotics to help your body. But basically, your white blood cells are incredibly important, vital for your existence every single day. He said to me, the doctor, I've only seen low white blood cell counts like this in patients who've had chemotherapy because the chemotherapy actually kills their white blood cells. But I've never met a person who is alive that has 0.00 white blood cells. And then he said to me, you are very, very sick. We are going to try and keep you alive for the next 24 hours. I was like, what? The truth is, I was so delirious from having had a fever for a week. I hadn't eaten or drunken in days. I was incredibly dehydrated. I was so sick. I couldn't really understand what he was saying. He's saying, we're going to immediately diagnose you with something called septicemia. Septicemia is when you've got basically infection all over your body, and it's now everywhere. It's even in your bloodstream. And at the time, I didn't know this, but the statistics are this: 25% of people who come into hospital with septicemia don't survive the first 24 hours. They just don't survive. So he said, there is an underlying illness here. We don't know what it is. We know you're very, very sick. We're immediately going to do a few things. We're going to give you first the strongest antibiotic we have in this hospital and try and just help you. The second thing that we are going to do for you is give you as much IV fluids as you can handle, because we have learned that the IV fluids stop your organs going into shock. They were worried that my kidneys would shut down and my liver would shut down. That's what happens with septicemia. Your whole body is filled with infection, and suddenly all your organs start shutting down, and that's what happens, and that's why people die from it. I didn't really understand what was going on. They then spent the entire night giving me CT scans, MRI scans with contrast, x-rays, blood tests. I spent the whole of Sunday night. At about midnight, my husband says, I have to go home. I left my baby at home. I had a 12-week-old baby at home. And my whole life had changed in the last few hours of, I'm fine, I'll be home in a few hours, to the doctor telling me, we're admitting you, and you probably will not be leaving this hospital for the next few weeks, if you're lucky. If you're lucky enough to be alive in the next few weeks, you're not leaving this hospital anytime soon. You shouldn't even leave this room. No one's really allowed anywhere near you. Every single person in this hospital is life-threatening for you at the moment. If you have 0.00 white blood cells, somebody could cough in your direction and it could be a life-threatening situation for you. So here I was. So I said to my husband, okay, you go home. And I was left alone in hospital. And the whole night I had an IV in one arm with IV antibiotics and an IV in the other arm with fluids. And my hospital bed was taken. My hospital bed was moved from one room to another room by different nurses and technicians to get me to all the different exam rooms that I would need to be in order to get tested. They finally put me in my own room. I don't remember what time, at 4 or 5 in the morning. I don't even remember. And I fell asleep unconsciously. I wake up at about 10 o'clock in the morning and my bed is surrounded by doctors. I have 5 or 6 doctors around my bed. And they each introduce themselves to me. I'm still in the clothes that I wore yesterday. My phone is now dead. My husband's at home looking after the kids, getting them ready for school. And I'm just in a room in the Royal Free Hospital. And they were saying to me, in a very quiet, serious doctor voice, they were saying to me, so listen, we don't know what you have, but it looks very serious. We think you have some type of leukemia. That's what it looks like to us. We don't know, but because you have no white blood cells, very little red blood cells, and very low platelets. So basically your bone marrow provides for you white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. And when your bone marrow shuts down, this is life-threatening for you. And usually this is some kind of sign that you have a leukemia of some sort, and that it's attacking your bone marrow. So I couldn't believe it. It was Monday morning. I was like, what are you talking about? They said, we're going to now do a series of tests. And then one of them said, we're the hematology team. We are the, rare diseases team. We are this team. We are that team. And we're all going to now do tests. I then spent the next 2 weeks in the Royal Free Hospital, very, very sick. It was a very, very strange time for me, my husband, my family. First of all, I'd like to say that the London Jewish community was fabulous. Within 24 hours of me being checked into hospital for we don't know what, and not that many people knew that I was in hospital, all my rotas were taken, supper started arriving at my house. Nobody actually started davening for me yet because people didn't know. They just knew that I was in hospital, and everybody wanted to know what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on. I didn't know, the doctors didn't know, everyone was guessing. That means every single day, the team would come in and say, no, we've ruled out this kind of cancer. We've ruled out this kind of leukemia. We think it might be this. At some point they said they were almost definitely sure it was that. It was a very, very interesting time, because when your life changes over a space of a minute, it happens that fast. You almost don't have time to take it in. And there is a feeling of Hashem is in charge in this moment. Completely Hashem is in charge. There is no way I could be in charge of it. I don't even know what's going on. There's no way I can be in charge here. In your normal daily regular life, you think you're in charge. You have your shopping lists and your to-do lists, and you think you know what you're going to do next. And then when things don't go your way, you're like, oh, Hashem obviously didn't want me to get there on time because I was stuck in traffic for an hour, or I missed that, or I was going to do that, but then something else happened. And you kind of plan your day, and then either it works out or it doesn't. And you work on yourself to understand that Hashem is arranging your life. But when your life changes so fast, and suddenly you go from being a very busy working mother to being by yourself in a hospital room. And I was by myself in a hospital room, and that was the safest place for me to be. So basically, anybody who came anywhere near me had to wash their hands, wear gloves, an apron, and a mask, and wasn't allowed to touch me, not even my children. So, one of my children, my toddler, wasn't even allowed to visit me. The doctor said to me that of all my children, my toddler was the most dangerous to me because he had the least understanding of how to do hygiene. And therefore, he was the most germy. Whereas my older kids, they would wash their hands regularly or whatever. My toddler wasn't even allowed in the hospital because they said that he has the most germs on him. He shouldn't be anywhere near me. And suddenly I got separated from everything that I was doing. That means I went from a space of doing and doing and doing to a place of totally being. I was just existing. And actually the existing was very hard. I was in a lot of pain. I still had infection all over my body, a throat infection, a stomach infection, every infection, even the antibiotics that were giving me, some of the infections killed, some not. About 10 days into my stay in the hospital, one night, I was so sick that the hospital called up my husband and said that we think that she only has half an hour left to live. My husband said that he started writing my hesped. I didn't actually realize it at the time. I do remember that night. It was a Wednesday night, or Tuesday night, actually, Wednesday, where suddenly at 3 o'clock in the morning, all the lights in my bedroom went on and 2 or 3 doctors came in the room and they took out some IVs and put in other IVs. And basically they said to me that I had a fever that they couldn't bring down with all the different antibiotics they had. They couldn't bring down the fever. And because I was in such a fragile state, anything was life-threatening for me. Anyways, the day that I got my diagnosis was a Thursday, and I'll never forget it. The doctor walked in with his team. He was the doctor, he was the hematologist that found out what was wrong with me. He walked in with his team of like 5 students, all of them doctors who I had been seeing over the past 10 days. And they said, we have finally found out what you have. You have a rare autoimmune disease called aplastic anemia. And it's so rare that only 5 people per year are diagnosed with this in the UK. They said what it means is that your body has decided that your own bone marrow is foreign to it and has switched it off. And there is no chemotherapy for it. There is actually no therapy for it. Your only hope of survival is to have a bone marrow transplant. And they asked me, how many siblings do you have? So I said, I have 6 siblings. They said, your chances of survival just went up by another 6, because your best chance of a bone marrow donor to be an exact match is a sibling. Thank God you've come from a big family. And basically, they explained to me that a bone marrow transplant had a 10% chance of killing me, but without a bone marrow transplant, this aplastic anemia would 100% kill me. So because my only hope of survival, they said, if you don't do this bone marrow transplant, you'll end up just living in hospital for months and months and months and months until you catch something, and then that's the end. You can't live without a bone marrow. Okay, so they came and told me this news. And, this kind of news is life-changing. As anybody would know who's ever been through anything, the news that you have a certain percentage chance of survival, the news that like 2 weeks ago you were making breakfast for your children in your house, and 2 weeks later you're in hospital fighting for your life. It was the scariest moment of my life, and I've been through many, many things. And I sent out a text to about 8 of my closest friends, and I said, please, can you daven for me? I've never asked anyone to daven for me. Please, can you daven for me? I just got diagnosed with a life-threatening disease. I didn't share exactly the name at the time. I wasn't ready to share. And they at the time said to me, we in the Royal Free Hospital don't deal with bone marrow transplants, only in UCH. We're going to put you in an ambulance and send you to UCH, where you're going to have a bone marrow transplant, and you're going to probably be there for another few months. So they predicted for me months and months of hospital, and they predicted for me a certain percentage chance of survival. And this was the way the doctors were speaking. Okay, so I sent out a text to maybe 8 people to say, please daven me, this is my Hebrew name, etc. Anyways, I went to sleep. It was a Thursday night. Friday morning, I woke up and I had 300 text messages on my phone. And I had no idea what happened. I thought, what has happened? Like, has the world gone crazy? And then I read message after message after message, and I suddenly realized that every person I texted done for me had passed on my text to everybody else. And the whole night, everybody was texting each other about me. And I didn't know that that was happening at all. And Friday morning, I woke up and everybody in the Jewish world knew. Everybody in Israel, everybody in America, everybody in South Africa, everybody in Australia, everybody who I'd ever met in my whole life. And I've met loads of people because I've been teaching in loads of different seminaries. And I was still in touch with many people because of social media. Everybody I'd ever met in my whole life, and there was this outpouring of love, of tefillah, of communal everything, communal outrage that this would be happening to me. And it's very interesting because I felt like I was the eye in the middle of a very, very big storm. Like there was a big storm happening around me, and I was an eye in a very big storm. Now, I have to tell you, for about 2 weeks, I had been in hospital then, and I was circling the drain. That means the doctors gave me blood transfusions, but my blood count didn't go up. They gave me platelet transfusions, but my platelet count didn't go up. They gave me synthetic white blood cells, and it wasn't taking. And this was going on for 2 weeks. And my doctors were getting very nervous that I wouldn't survive long enough to get even a bone marrow transplant. That means even once they diagnose you, you have to then live long enough in order to get the life-saving whatever, if it saves your life. And they kept saying, we need you to be stronger. We don't understand why your body's not accepting. You know, they kept giving me loads of transfusions, and it would seem like I wasn't. And then they would do blood tests 2-3 hours later, nothing had changed. And they were very anxious about me. Anyways, Thursday night, it would seem that lots of people had Tehillim groups in their house. Lots and hundreds of people were davening for me. A few WhatsApp groups had opened up of people saying Tehillim around the clock for me. Anyway, Friday morning, 6 a.m., they wake me up and they do a blood test. They do a blood test on me every 2-3 hours for my whole entire stay that I was in hospital, because that was the only way they could see what was going on in my blood. And then about 8 o'clock in the morning, the consultant walks in and says to me, Esty, your blood cell count is starting to go up a little bit. He wasn't saying, oh, Esty, you were cured. He was saying, oh, Esty, your body is now fighting it a little bit. That's good, because we need you to be strong enough to get a bone marrow transplant. So we're going to have to, we have to get you strong enough. So from the moment people started saying Tehillim for me, my count started to go up very, very slowly, by very small percentages, by 2 points, 5 points, 10 points, a tiny percentage. But for the doctors, it meant that it was, instead of on a downward trajectory, which I was on at the time, I was slowly on an upward trajectory, which means my body was fighting back. I went into hospital on the 1st of Elul last year, which was also the 1st of September. And I was in hospital for the whole month of Elul. And from the moment everybody davened for me, I started to feel a little bit better, a tiny bit better. And then they moved me into the UCH hospital. And I felt so depressed about my life. It was a very low moment. But I tell you what I didn't feel. I never felt in any of those moments disconnected from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think one of the reasons is because I've spent my life working on my emunah muscle. You know, every muscle in your body, if you work on it, it becomes very strong. And it's true also about the muscles in your mind. And, you know, when the doctors came to me and they said, you have this very, very, very rare autoimmune disease and we don't ever really see it, and there's only this kind of solution, it reminded me of my other story. I have a story that happened to me 17 years ago. I have a story about my eldest son, Daniel, who was born, my first child, who was born very, very ill. And we spent the first 2 years of his life in Shaare Zedek Hospital. And when he was about 6 months old, he was diagnosed also with a very, very, very rare congenital. He was missing a piece of one of his chromosomes. And they said, we don't know anybody who's diagnosed with this, only 20 people in the whole world. And it was all very rare. And at the time, what I remember is that I spent about a year or a year and a half going from doctor to doctor in Israel, trying to find a cure for my son, like every mother desperate to heal their child. I went from doctor to doctor, trying to find a cure for my child, to the top neurologist, to the top geneticists. I went to Tel Aviv, I went to Netanya, I went to Ichalov Hospital, I would call up doctors in America and Canada. And I remember when my son was about 1.5, and he was very sick, and he had at that point in his life already experienced many forms of Tchias HaMesim. He had had many cardiac arrests. He'd been through so much in his life. They told me that he wouldn't even survive to see his second birthday. I went to a doctor and I said to the doctor, he was the top neurologist, a very, very arrogant man. The top neurologist in the whole of Israel. I managed to get a meeting with him. And he said to me, when I said to him the situation, I showed him my son and he did his whole exam of him. And then he said, Geveret Hamilton, he said to me, we doctors, we are just scientists. What we do is we figure out what's wrong with people, and then we try different medicines on them. Some medicines work on this people, some medicines work on that people. We are experimenting all the time. Science is coming up with new things all the time, and we are all the time experimenting to come up with new ways of healing different things. But we are scientists, we are not miracle workers. You are looking for a miracle, but we are just scientists. And I remember when I left the office, I had a huge light bulb moment and a paradigm shift, because I'd gone from, in that meeting, I'd gone from the mother who was trying to find a doctor who could save my son to realize, what am I doing here? The only person who can save my child is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem is the real Roifeh. All of these people are just messengers. And even though this doctor is very arrogant, he has said something that's actually full of anova. What was he saying? We don't create nisim. We are just doctors. We are scientists. And it took this non-religious Jew to remind me of my own emunah, to remind me of what I really believed, that only Hashem runs the world, that only Hashem gives life, only Hashem takes away life, only Hashem decides these things. And we go to the doctors because that's our hishtadlus. But we should never think this doctor is going to save me. We say this doctor is a shaliach for a refuah shalema for Hashem. This doctor is a messenger from God. But if we ever go into a doctor's office and we say, this doctor is going to save my son, we are getting it all wrong. And I had spent a whole year taking my child. Which doctor is going to save my son? Is it going to be this doctor? Is it going to be this doctor? And they all predicted terrible outcomes for him. And it was such a life lesson. And then my son lived. He is still alive today. He's 17 years old. He is very severely disabled. He doesn't walk. He doesn't talk. He doesn't feed himself. He is physically and mentally disabled. But he is an neshama that shines so bright that just his presence in the world changes people's lives. Everybody who's met him, their life has changed just by meeting him. And his being here in the world is very, very meaningful. But what I have had to do for the 17 years of his life is to remind myself every day that what Hashem is in charge, that I have no control, that I don't know what people's life journey is, what my life journey is, what his life's journey is, that we all come here and our presence here in this world is a gift from Hashem, and that everything that goes on in our life is a gift from Hashem, and that I've worked on it so long that when the doctor said to me, you have a very, very rare autoimmune disease. We hardly ever see it. We don't really know how to fix it. We will give you a bone marrow transplant because that's your best chance of survival. But really, we don't have a fixing for you. When he left the office, I turned to my husband and I said to him, I don't want anyone to heal me. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is it. And every time another doctor came in and spoke to us and said to us more bad news, when he left the room, I said to my husband, I do not accept this doctor to be a shaliach for a refuah shlema for me. I am not doing this again. I recognize the words and I recognize the sentence because I remember them from 17 years ago. I remember them and I made a mistake then, but I'm not going to make a mistake now. I know that the only Roifeh is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they can give me whatever statistics they like. But I know they're guessing. It's one big guessing game. They're scientists. They're doing the best they can. And my husband said, Esty, don't be crazy. He found who's the who's the top doctor in London who deals with aplastic anemia? It's this woman, Dr. Judith Marsh. We're going to make an appointment with her. Even if she doesn't have appointments in the next 6 months, we'll figure out a way to get her to see me. And I said, you know, on Seder night, we say the words, Hashem took us out of Egypt, out of Mitzrayim, lo yalidei malach, lo yalidei shliach, rak HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvodo u'ba'atzmoi. Hashem didn't send a shliach. He didn't send malach. Only Hashem did it. And how do we know? Because Hashem turned over the whole of nature. Everything that was the laws of nature, Hashem uprooted all the laws of nature in every single makkah, in every single plague. He uprooted every single rule of nature in order to show the Egyptians, do you know who's in charge? I'm in charge. I made nature. I can break nature because I'm the one that created it, because it's not nature who's in charge. I'm in charge. And that's what, and the biggest nace of it all was when Hashem split the Yam Suf and Hashem told the water to stand on its end, and that the Yid and the Jewish people walked through. That was the biggest way of saying I am in charge, not the water, not the sea, not nature. I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, am in charge. And I couldn't really daven very much in hospital. I had a very high fever most of the time. I was in a lot of pain a lot of the time. I was sleeping a lot of the time, which meant, you know, just getting up and going to the bathroom was so exhausting that I would go to the bathroom, come back, and then fall asleep in bed because I was so tired, because that act was so exhausting. And then every time I would try and eat some food, the act of just trying to eat some food was so exhausting, I'd fall asleep again. People who are very, very sick fall asleep a lot, and the reason is because they're just working so hard to keep their body alive that any other action is so exhausting, they end up sleeping a lot. But whenever I could daven, I would turn to Hashem and I would say, I'm not doing this again. Lo yalidei malach, lo yalidei shliach. I only want you to heal me. I can't, and I did everything the doctor said. Anyways, Erev Rosh Hashanah. So then I moved to UCH hospital, and I was in UCH hospital for about a week. And the whole time that I was in the hospital, they kept giving me blood tests every 3 hours because I had a blood disease, right? So they had to give me a blood test every few hours. And they said to me, you know, your counts are going up, your platelets. So basically there were 3 measures of how well I was doing: my white blood cells, my red blood cells, and my platelets. So if I would give you an example, platelets, you're supposed to have between 150 and 400 platelets in your blood at all times. I don't know what the numbers mean, but that's what you're supposed to have. I had 6. So when you're in single digits, what that means about you is that if you get a cut, you could just basically bleed to death. If you get internal bruise, you can internally bleed to death. There's no clotting agents. If you have no platelets, you're in very, very, very big trouble, okay? So what happened is that the moment everybody started davening for me, my platelets went from 6 to 10 to 12 to 15 to 18 to 25 to 28 to 32. And so did all my counts for my white, red were going up very slightly by 2 points, by 5 points every time. So it was Erev Rosh Hashanah, and they said, you know what, Mrs. Hamilton, you should go, we're going to send you home. I said, how can you send me home? I thought that I was going to be here for the next few months. They said, listen, you're not eating well in this hospital, you're not sleeping well in this hospital, and we need you to be very strong for a bone marrow transplant. So we're going to send you home with this bag of medicines. I had so many medicines, I had to write a list, because every hour I was taking different medications in order just to keep me going. And they said, but you're under house arrest. You can't go in crowds of people. No one's allowed inside your house. Your children are allowed to be in your house because they're your bubble, but they all have to be hand sanitizing all the time. It's so interesting to give this talk now, because I gave this talk like December last year and there was no corona yet. And people were like, what? Now I say it and everybody's like, yes, right, your family's your bubble. Well, my family were my bubble. So I was allowed to be with my kids and my husband. But even then, they all had little hand sanitizers in their pocket and they had to hand sanitize before they touched me. If I had to leave the house, I had to wear a mask, and I was so embarrassed that I never left the house. Now everybody's wearing masks. It would have been so easy. In fact, somebody reminded me that on Rosh Hashanah, I went to a shul around the corner. No, not Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I went to a shul around the corner for me for like 10 minutes. I wasn't allowed to be in shul, but I was so desperate and I had been so ill. And she said to me, she remembers I was wearing a blue mask, and she said the color of my face matched the color of my mask. I was so ill. I was like this green, blue, like, I don't know if you've ever seen a very sick person, that their skin is kind of translucent. That's how I looked. I looked like that. I lasted about 5-10 minutes in shul, and then I thought I was going to collapse. I did nothing. I was just standing there in shul holding my siddur, but it was so exhausting just standing there for 10 minutes. I went home again, but I just felt like I desperately needed to have that kind of spiritual infusion. And so my blood counts kept going up little by little by little. And it was an unbelievable experience to be part of that, to see that happening. And they said to me, okay, for the next 2 weeks, your blood counts are going to go up because we're giving very, very strong medication, but then it's going to fall down. So they predicted to be for me basically that I would be able to be home for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but by Sukkot I'd be back in hospital. And that's when they would do a bone marrow transplant on me. And that was basically what was happening. So I came home every Rosh Hashanah. I don't remember Rosh Hashanah really so well. Even at home, I was sleeping a lot. Somebody came to my house to blow the shofar, and I couldn't leave my house. No one was allowed to visit me. Anybody who was anywhere near me could be life-threatening for me, so I couldn't. And every time I davened, I said to Hashem, please, can you heal me? I can't do this again. I can't go to doctor after doctor after doctor. I just want you to heal me. And that is exactly what happened. And it is a wild story because my doctors today, my non-Jewish doctors, tell me that I am a medical miracle. And I think they plan to write a paper on me because they don't understand what happened. But basically, one of the deals of being home is that every 2 days I would have to go into hospital for blood tests. So that's what happens every 2 days. And there's an amazing organization here in London where it gives people lifts to and from hospital. And amazing women did that. Every 2 days, they would pick me up from my house and drive me to the hospital, which was about 45-minute drive away. And then they would drive me home. I mean, unbelievable. The infrastructure of Chesed in our community, I believe, is the zechus for all of us. Because whatever we do, once we come together as a community, Hashem has put in the world a kind of, he's created a spiritual dynamic that when Klal Yisrael get together as a whole, it could create such an impact in Shemayim that more of an impact than even an individual tzaddik. That means when Jewish people come together for tefillah, or they come together for chesed, or they come together, what we try and understand, the concept of, let's say, Shira, when Klal Yisrael sings Shira, is that an individual note doesn't do anything, but when it all comes together, it creates a song. And what that means is the total is always greater than the sum of its parts. That means however good of a pianist you are, if you come together as part of an orchestra, your impact will be 20-fold. It won't just be you and everybody else. It'll be, wow, the music is like a surround sound. And that's what it felt like. The chesed of the community around me was almost like a surround sound. It was surrounding all of us, all of our family. So every 2 days I went to hospital and my blood counts was going up. And it was coming closer to Yom Kippur, and I was very nervous. Erev Sukkah, so I would have to go back into hospital. My children would have to be alone in the Sukkah with my husband. And then my doctor turned around to me and said, Esty, we're not going to do the bone marrow transplant yet. I want to wait. Your body is doing something. Very slowly, we expected you to have a real drop, and you haven't yet had that drop. You're slowly, very incrementally, but you're inclining. That means everything is going up. We're going to wait. We're going to wait another month and see what's happening. And over the month of October and November of last year, my blood counts kept going up and up and up. And in December, my doctor said to me, we don't understand what happened, but it looks like your bone marrow has regenerated itself. And I was so angry with my doctor. I said, why didn't you tell me that was a possibility? You made me so nervous. You gave me all these statistics about how I'm not going to survive, and if I survive, and this is how much chance I'm going to have, and how could you not tell me that my bone marrow could regenerate? So he said, because it's not possible. Your bone marrow cannot regenerate itself. What I'm saying when I'm telling you the words, he said, I've been a hematologist for over 30 years. I've never had a patient like you in my whole life. You came to the hospital so sick, we didn't even know if you had survived the first 24 hours. And when we finally diagnosed you, we didn't know if you'd be even strong enough to receive the bone marrow transplant. And while you were waiting for your bone marrow transplant, your bone marrow regenerated itself. We have no medical explanation for this. It's not really even possible. I, in my career, have never seen it happen, he said. I've only read in medical journals about a random person in a different country that it happened to. I've never met somebody. And he said, what did you do differently? Did you take any medication outside of this hospital? Did you meet any guru? Did you take any supplements? I said, I did whatever you told me to do. I took all the medicines, the whole list that you told me to. I came every 2 days to have blood tests. I've done nothing. I've never in my whole life done so much of nothing. I sit on my couch and then I sit on my bed and then I go back and sit on my couch. I don't buy food. I don't make food. I don't look after my kids. I do nothing. I don't even hold my own baby. I have done nothing. For 3 months, I've basically lived in my pajamas. I promise I've done nothing. I said, but I am part of a very large Jewish community, and they have all been praying for me. So he said to me, you know, there are many sick people in this hospital. Do you think that they can pray for them as well? And this story of this miracle story of my life is so unbelievable that when I repeat this story, I almost don't believe it. I only believe it because it happened to me. The experience of it happened to me. The tremendous shock of suddenly becoming so sick, and the subsequent, like trying to get into the idea that I have to accept whatever life Hashem has given me. And then the unbelievable miracle of having my own body heal itself. And I know that my body didn't heal itself. I know that Hashem was my Rofei. And that's really what happened. What happened is that I said, I don't want anyone, no one to be my refuah. I don't accept anyone as a shaliach for my refuah shalema, because I have done this already for a very long time, because this is not my first story. And I think that when you have a story, one of the things that you know is that everybody has a story. When something happens to you in your life, what you remember is that nobody really, even me telling you my story now, I can't even describe to you all the lows and all the highs and the deep, deep connection that you feel with HaKadosh Baruch Hu at your lowest moment. You can't describe it to anybody, but when I speak to an audience and I see people nod their heads, I know that they've been exactly in that place. And that is what I'm talking about. When you come back from the brink, when you have really a near-death experience, which is what I experienced this time last year, it's now the 1st of November, my body was starting to heal itself. I didn't even know it was happening to me. I was still waiting for the moment the doctor would call me and say, you have to come back to hospital and have a bone marrow transplant. A bone marrow transplant is the last thing that they do, a last desperate effort to do for somebody before they die. That's what a bone marrow transplant really is. And when that's explained to you, they're like, this has to work, because after this, we have nothing else. There is no other, like medicine waiting in the wind. There's no other chances of us helping you. There's nothing else. When you know there's nothing else, you know there's only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what you know. When you're left with nothing else. When the doctor said to me about my son, we are just scientists. You are looking for a miracle. When you know that, then you realize, oh, okay. And then once that happens to you, there is a total freedom. There is a kind of embracing of the flow of life, embracing of, I make plans, but I don't panic when it doesn't work out, because everything happens in a blink of an eye. Everything. I could be well one day and very sick the next. And there's a constant internal struggle of, what should I do now? And should I do this? And I have to do that, and I have to do that. And then you have a near-death experience, and what you realize is that there's a relief of letting go of this constant internal struggle. I don't need to have this internal struggle. In the morning, what I do is I plan my day, and then I take these plans and I offer them up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I say, these are my plans for today. Now you're going to let me know which one of these is going to be a good idea and which isn't, because I'm totally relying on your direction. When you feel the power of your soul, when you feel that I don't really have to do more things, because what I have to contribute here in this world is myself. The internal journey that we make inside ourselves is really how we affect the world around us. And this is what the Torah says all the time. Like, the mitzvah that I do will affect you, and the chesed that I do will affect you. And I looked this up after I got very ill, and then I got very, very much better. And I felt that it was because of the embrace of the community around me, I looked up, what does it mean, the power of the community? What does the Torah have to tell us about the power of the community? And it says that when we daven b'lashon rabim. So every time we say, right, our whole Shemona Esrei is all b'lashon rabim. It's all in the, it's not about me, it's about we, right? It's all in the lashon rabim. Why? Because being part of a tzibur, being part of a community means that you would be zoicha, you would merit to things that you wouldn't necessarily merit on your own, which is why we're told that for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, even a great tzaddik should daven with a tzibur, because even a great tzaddik will have more of a zechus when they're davening in a klal. And there was this very sweet story that I once heard, a mashal for this. Imagine there's a whole auditorium of children taking an exam, maybe 100 children taking an exam, and one child is taking an extra 5-10 minutes after the exam, and he comes in to hand in his paper, and the proctor says, I'm so sorry, but the exam was finished at 2 o'clock and you only finished at 2:10. I can't accept your exam. The exam is over. So this boy says to this proctor, do you know my name? So the proctor goes, I don't know your name. So he then slips in his paper in the pile of 100 of exams on the desk of the teacher and says, that's fine, you're just going to have to mark my paper like everybody else's. What does that mean? When we slip in to the congregation, when we say, I'm part of this congregation, then because Hashem has created a spiritual dynamic, that means just like there are rules of nature, there's also spiritual rules. And the spiritual rule is like this: when we come together as a klal, Hashem can't turn us away. Even Esther Hamalka knew this, which is why Esther Hamalka, before she went to Achashverosh, she said, gather everybody together and everybody should daven, fast and pray for me. Why? Because when we gather everyone together, I know that Hashem has made a spiritual dynamic in the world, that when the Klal Yisrael come together, he can't refuse us. And once we are part of a tzibur, it doesn't really matter what we've done personally. It only matters as a nation who we are. And that is something that is very, very powerful. And I felt that very strongly after I was ill and I got better. There was a woman in Israel who a young mother, 28 years old, who was suddenly diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And Rav Chaim Kanievsky was asked, what should we do for her? She's a young mother. How can we save her? What fillers should we save for her? So he said, you know how she's having 24-hour physical care? She also needs 24-hour spiritual care. There should be somebody saying Tehillim for her every minute of the day. And when I heard that that's what Rav Chaim Kanievsky had like paskin for her, I had shivers going down my spine. When I was in hospital, I was so ill. A nurse came in every 5 minutes to check that I was still alive, to check my blood pressure, to check my temperature, to check my IV. I was so annoyed because they kept waking me up and I was in so much pain and I just wanted them to leave me alone. But they couldn't afford to leave me alone. They had to come in every 5 minutes to check on me. And after I got better, my husband told me there were like 4 different WhatsApp groups of Tehillim being said for me all the time. And because it was all around the world, it was happening around the clock. And he had been on 2 of these WhatsApp groups. And he said to me, you know, Esty, 7 books of Tehillim was said for you today. 5 books of Tehillim were said for you today. And I didn't want to be on any of the groups because I felt very anxious that I was so sick that so much Tehillim had to be said for me. It actually gave me anxiety. But for my husband, it gave him a lot of chizuk. And when I heard that Rav Chaim Kanievsky said that, I thought to myself, wow, I had Tehillim said for me every single moment. Just like you have physical care every single moment when you're so, so sick. You also need spiritual care every single moment when you're so, so sick. It's like a nurse taking your temperature, somebody saying Tehillim for you. And that is the power of Arevus. And I wanted to speak a little bit about the power of Arevus. I know I only have a few more minutes, but it's a very inspiring idea. Because in the Western world, every individual is only responsible for themselves and has the right to work for their own greatest happiness and pleasure for as long as they're not hurting anybody else. But in the Jewish community, there is no such thing, because everybody's business is my business, because it's my responsibility to uphold the community standard. It's my responsibility to make sure that poor people have food, to make sure that everybody has the things that they need. I am responsible for the people in my community. me. And that is what was so beautiful. You know, when we say something, when we do a physical chesed for somebody, what we're saying is, I want to be part of your business. I want to make a meal for you. I want to do a rota for you. And I want to tell you something. The chesed that was done for me was done with such an open heart. You know how, let's say, doing rota, I don't know about everybody else or whoever's experienced this, but it's exhausting and annoying. It comes to the worst part of the day. And it's kind of the thing that you dread the most. One of the things that immediately needed to happen for me was that somebody had to take over all my rotas. My kids were all in different schools, and somebody had to take over all my rotas immediately. And not only did people do it, but people did it with pleasure. And doing a physical chesed for somebody is saying, I do not subscribe to the Western philosophy of I'll take care of my stuff and you'll take care of your stuff, but rather Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. If you're ill, that is part of my world. You and me, we are intimately connected. But I think that the real Arevus is the spiritual chesed that was done for me. And I would really, really like to leave you with this message if I could. There are many spiritual cheseds done for me. People were saying Tehillim around the clock for me. Mitzvahs were done in my name. I have been very involved in kiruv most of my life. And women were texting me. One woman said she took on the mitzvah of head covering for my refuah shlema. Another woman said that she'd taken on another very special mitzvah for my refuah shlema. Somebody texted me and said that they had given tzedakah in my name. Many people had said to me they'd given tzedakah in my name. People went to their own rabbonim around the world. People put kvitzlach at, at the Rebbe's kiva. People went to Meiron and they recited the entire book of Tehillim by the Holy Quran for me. People would text me in Eretz Yisrael that they were going to the Kosel specifically to daven for me. People were making groups of Tehillim in their home. People daven for me. But why is spiritual chesed such an amazing chesed? And I'll tell you why. Because everybody has personal problems in their own life. Everybody has something that they desperately need that only Hashem can give them. And whether it's a shidduch or a job or mental health or physical health or to have children, no one is problem free. And everybody needs really the zechus of their own mitzvahs for their own life. And when somebody does a spiritual chesed for you, when somebody says, now, the mitzvah that I'm going to do now is the zechus of this mitzvah is so powerful that I want to do it. What I want to do with it is give it to another person. That really is selfless giving in its most pure way. And I think when we say, what will my Tehillim do? What difference will my tefillah make? We mistakenly think that we're not so important. But what your tefillah can do, there is a spiritual world that we sometimes can touch if we're lucky, that we can sometimes feel if we're lucky. And that is a very real world. And when we do a mitzvah, we need that zechus ourselves because we all want to have that closeness with Hashem. And when we get together as a community for a single goal, we can impact people's lives, we can change the world, and we can ultimately bring Mashiach. And I felt throughout my whole story that it was not in my zechus that I was healed. It was in the zechus of being part of Klal Yisrael around the world. And I see this all the time, who say, this person, their problem is my problem. Their pain is my pain. And my mitzvahs, I want it to be their mitzvahs. And when we have arevus to that depth, in that way, we show Hashem that we are really one neshama and that we're really, really ready for the ultimate geula. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak to you. It's such a privilege to be able to share my story with so many people around the world, in London, and to be stuck at home, but still to be able to share in such a meaningful way is very, very special. Thank you so much for the privilege. I really appreciate it.
Rebbetzin Esti. Wow. Esti, you have given us so much chizuk and so much to think about. As you mentioned at the beginning, and then you said it yourself, it's so much like different times of COVID that people are going through with the masks and the hand sanitizers, etc. But like you said it, ke'eref ayin, in the blink of an eye,
Yes.
life can change. And
Yeah.
so too, we want to ask the Rebbein Shalom that ke'eref ayin, we should all have Mashiach and go out of this galus now.
Absolutely. Amen.
Thank you, and I'm going to give you over to Michelle.
Okay. So I'm just taking it all in because, as you said in the middle of your talk, the people that were nodding their heads really understood, and I just get every word you were saying. And it's a bit difficult for me now to talk because this time last year, my husband was very much deteriorating, and he said to me one morning, my husband had brain cancer, and he died quite a horrible death, and he defied all the doctors about a million times. And so much so that they told me there's a trajectory for this illness, and then there's your husband. And so much so that he had a -3 cell count, white cell count, and then he got better. And what so much so that I once called up, asked the doctor something. He came back, they said they need to check his name because there's no way that this man is still alive. You know, that, but I think one of the things he turned around to me and he said to me, we are not, this is not an Nisayon. That was how he believed, and he believed Eino Milvado, and it just reminds me he didn't suffer because he just didn't accept it. Yeah, I think it was hard for everybody else, and I think that really helped. It really helped with ours, and I just feel for you. I'm so grateful to Kaddish Baruch Hu that he gave you a full shalom and that you're able to share your story and people can gain. Before we go to questions, I just wanted to, we've got a couple of questions. I just want to say there is an unfolding incident going on in Vienna, and I feel that because we have so many people together that we should say a capital to Tehillim. There seems to be some form of terrorist attack and near Shul. I don't exactly know what's happened in Vienna, but all the Yidden have been told to stay inside. And I also think we know there are a lot of people still suffering. I have a Tehillim group in Neshmas, my husband, and I'm very in touch with the suffering that's going on all over from COVID and also from a lot of other things. People are very frightened, there's mental health, and I think if we're just all feeling so inspired by Rebbetzin Esti, if we could all just say one capital together, it will probably be something that we're on such a high level at the moment that we can just feel for so many that maybe I'm sure we can make a difference. Hani, I thought you said Yosef was going to put, because I Kuf Kof Aleph on screen. Can we do that now? Hello? Hani, is that happening? Can you hear me? Oh, sorry, I have to unmute you. Hani,
Has your tech guy done it?
I think, Hani, do you want to lead it, or do you think everyone should just say it quietly, or? Okay, so while
okay, I have it, Michelle. We'll do Kapitel Kuf Chaf Aleph. And if anyone has it to Tehillim, I thought they were going to share it on the screen, but it's not. So I'll just say it's Kapitel Kuf Chaf Aleph, chapter 121.
Okay.
Dir Lamales Esa Ene El Harim Me Ayin Yavei Ezri. Ezri Me Im Adonai Eise Shemayim Va'aretz. Al yitin lamait raglecha al yonam shemrecha. Hine la yonam v'lo yishan shemer Yisrael. Adonai shemrecha Adonai silcha al yad yaminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka yareich v'layla. Adonai yishmarcha mikol ra yishmar el nafshecha. Adonai yishmar seitcha oveyecha mi'ata v'ad olam. Enough of this dark golus.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Hani. I also wanted to say that I feel really privileged that, that we've joined so many women from so many different places. Hani's from a Lubavitch organization and from a Gouda in Manchester. Esti is from her own world. And you know what? It's just such a way to go. It's incredible that we could just be together and, we just grow through stories. So I have one question here. Thank you. I mean, if you read the chat, everybody is inspired like I am. Everybody is moved. And by the way, everyone, I'm going to be really tough now. Don't just be moved. Do something about it. Take something on. Don't just go away saying, I heard a really amazing story. Like, whatever you do is amazing, even a little thing or a little chesed or whatever. Just take something on from this, because then it grows. So somebody asked a question further up. An unbelievable story, hard to believe. How did you feel connection to Hashem and not despair? What's the difference? I hope my question is clear. So before I ask the answer, I just want to say one thing, that when I went to my counselor, I once went to one counselor when my husband was very sick, and she said to me, she sat down and she said to me, I just want to ask you, does your religion help you with what you're going through? And I walked out the room and never went back to that counselor again, because when you're going through whatever, I'm sure a lot of people on here are going through things, whatever you're going through, whatever your trouble, whatever nisayon you're going through, the thing that you cling to the most, that we are so lucky that we have a Kadosh Baruch Hu to be there for us. And once you accept that, that's when people said to us, how could you accept what was going on? And my entire family, once they accepted that, that's when we began to see the miracles and what was going on in our life. But Esty, they're not here to listen to me. I just wanted to answer that. Esty, do you want to answer the question?
Can you repeat the question? Because I was so interested in your answer, I forgot the question.
So she said, how did you feel the connection to Rabboni Shalom and not despair? And what's the difference?
I think there are moments of despair. It's not just one big, emunah party. I think that there are moments, I think you feel both. I think that as a human being, you feel a lot of sadness. I don't know if despair is the right word. That's not what I felt. I didn't feel despair. I think you feel a lot of sadness because you expect your life to go a certain way. And then it totally takes a left turn and you're in a totally different place now. And I think at the beginning, it's just quite shocking. But as I said, when you have lived a life where you have to accept that Hashem is in charge and you have to work on accepting Hashem is in charge all the time, then you're building that emunah muscle. And then when things don't go your way, it's not a big surprise, because what you realize about your life story is that you're on a journey. We often feel that we are driving a car and we are in the driver's seat. And then something happens in your life and you realize that you are not in the driver's seat, you are in the passenger seat, and that Hashem is in the driver's seat. And it's a very hard thing to work on letting go of the control that you want to have on your life. But it's also a very freeing thing. It feels there is a certain freedom in saying, I will have a plan for my life. And when it doesn't go my way, I will accept that Hashem has a different plan. And because Hashem created me and created the whole world, probably his plan is better than mine. Probably what he wants to happen is going to be the right plan. And it took me years to work on it. That means what I want to emphasize is that going through a nisayon, I remember when the nisayon of my son and going through all the ups and downs, I was such an unworked on human being that I spent lots of time in despair and in anguish and in feeling very, very far from Hashem. It's not true that I felt very close. It happened to be that in this nisayon, I had already worked on myself so much. People don't see all that work because they just think, oh, wow, she had a nisayon and she sailed through it. I had 17 years already to prepare for this nisayon, because I lived in the life that I lived, or with my child specifically, who had so many issues and so many hospital visits and so many things that happened to him that were not part of the plan, that it took me many years. I remember that we were in hospital when my son was like 1.5 years old, and we kept trying to go live at home, and then he would have more seizures or stop breathing, and we'd go to the hospital, and my husband and I would say, Al pi Hashem yachanu, al pi Hashem yisou. In the desert, the Jewish people, they would encamp when Hashem would say that it's time to encamp. And then when Hashem would say it's time to move, then they'd move. And sometimes they would encamp for 10 days in one place, and then they'd have to move. And sometimes they would camp somewhere for 2 years. And their whole journey in the desert was a life lesson in Al pi Hashem yachanu, al pi Hashem yisou, in the idea that wherever Hashem wants us to be, that's where we'll be. And if we're somewhere for 10 days and we're somewhere else for 2 years and somewhere else for 10 years, that is the journey of the life that Hashem wants us to live. And it took many, many years to get to that place. But once you have worked on that for a long time, when you're faced with hardships in different ways, you recognize it for what it is, which is Hashem is steering your life in a certain way, and you get to only choose the way you respond, but you don't get to choose anything else. And I want to say something else about that just for 2 minutes, if you'd let me. There is a formula for actualizing a person's potential, and this is the way the formula works. There is your life story, or all your stuff. Everybody has stuff. Even the person you think doesn't have any stuff, they have stuff. Even though you don't know their story, they have a story. Everybody has a story, okay? So you take your life journey, plus, and then there's, I think, 3 different ways that you can deal with the things that happen to you in your life. The one way to deal with it is to feel very victimized, very miserable, very bitter. Everything bad always happens to me. Hashem hates me. The world hates me. Nothing good's ever going to happen. I'm sure we've all met people like this. I feel sorry for them. They live very sad lives. They translate everything around them as terrible and horrible. They have this unconscious bias that they then try and every story they try and say, see, I told you all the bad things happen to me. And then there's a middle way of dealing with it, which is with a lot of sarcasm and humor. But I think the highest level of dealing with the stuff in your life is by saying, what am I learning from this place? How can I grow from this place? How can I become a different person? What messages is Hashem telling me? What's the internal work that I have to do from this space? And sometimes the internal work is to work on yourself, because you meet yourself and you realize that you're not a good person or a nice person, or you can be a better person. And sometimes the internal work is to let go and let Hashem really run your life and recognize that this is not in your control. But when you take all the stuff in your life and you add it to all the stories and lessons and light bulb moments that you've had in your life, what that equalized is actualized potential. We are all born with a potential to be very, very, very high, great human beings, very worked on, very refined, very spiritual human beings. We can all get there. And the only way that we're going to get there is to take all our stuff, our whole story in our life, and we're going to add to that everything that we could possibly learn from it, and let go of all the bitterness and anger, and just stay with, how has that changed me as a person? How can I let that change? What will I learn from this? What did I learn from my last assignment? How to really do chesed, how to go out of my way to text somebody or send them a message, how doing a mitzvah for someone and letting them know is a real chesed, how sharing a story is not only courageous, but can inspire others. That's what I learned maybe from that story. And what does that equalize? The actualized potential. Because we all have the potential to be that person, and how we actualize it is by using this formula. So what I would say is that if a person is going through a hard nisayon in their life, if they choose to actualize the potential of that moment, what they will have to create for themselves is a paradigm shift. And instead of saying, I'm a victim of terrible circumstance, what they can say is that this is my life story, and it is going to refine me. It is going to reveal my greatness. And everybody, I think, has a superpower. And the way you find out what your superpower is by looking at the story of your life. Because that journey has been very, very specially chosen for your neshama in order to help you get to the place that you've been. So I was chosen to have a very disabled special needs child. I was chosen to have that child 17 years ago when the world yet hadn't opened their hearts and minds so much to disabled children. And in fact, when my disabled child was born, one of my relatives asked me the question, are you going to tell anybody about him? That was the question that I was asked. It's hard to believe 17 years later, because there are now so many camps and so many social groups and everybody's so accepting and loving, but it wasn't like that 17 years ago. And one of the things I chose to do is I said, why should I be ashamed? This is what Hashem has chosen for me to have. And he is a beautiful neshama. He's exactly what he's supposed to be. He's not who I want him to be, maybe, or how I expected my first child to be, but he is exactly the way he's supposed to be. And the only way that I can live my life with him is by saying, this is a gift from Hashem, just like everything else is a gift from Hashem. And I would say that when we see our life as something specially handmade just for me, and then we can understand that this is the journey that my neshama has to go through in order to get to its highest place, then we can, even in the darkest moments, we can feel very connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because we are in a place of learning, or in a place of connection, rather than the place of pain and disconnection.
Thank you, Esty. Thank you, and you've given everyone a lot of food for thought. I just want to also remind everyone that this is a 4-week series, that tonight we were very lucky to have Rebbetzin Esty. And next week we are moving to a different part of London with a completely different type of story from Elisheva, who is coming from China to London with a lot in between and an amazing, amazing story. So in Mirza Hashem, remember to tune on next Monday at 8:30 to hear our next Woman of Courage. Although each one of you who are listening are all women of courage and who all have the courage to do the Ratzon of the Eibishter. Thank you again, Rebbetzin Esty. And if Michelle, you want to say anything, over to you.
No, I don't want to say anything, but I'm conscious that somebody wrote quite a personal question. I'm going to forward it to you, Hani, and to Esty, and maybe we'll personally answer it afterwards. I don't think we should answer it here now. It's the only problem is I'm not quite sure who we're going to answer the question to. So because it's an anonymous attendee. If anybody wants to use any of the phone numbers or the Chabad .org link, send the question anonymously, then we can have it. Have you? Can you see that, Honey? A question on the screen. Maybe you send a phone number that the person could get, so we could answer the question. No, I just want to say I feel really privileged to be involved in this, and hopefully we'll be joining you next week. But yeah, you're all women of courage, as Hani was saying. And one other thing that I also mentioned when I spoke a few months ago is anybody that's feeling lonely, it's a very simple thing. It's not, it's no great thing. Pick up the phone and talk to a friend. There were times where things were so tough for me, and just sometimes you get so caught up in yourself that you feel you can't speak. Just pick up and speak to somebody. Do not feel, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a mental health professional, counselor, a headmaster, a rabbi. Just somebody. Just talk. Please don't hold any suffering inside. Everybody is finding it difficult, and the prospect of another lockdown is a bit depressing, but we'll all be fine, and we'll get through.
I just saw the question in the Q&A. I'm not going to answer it very deeply, but superficially, I do want to mention that when somebody has a nisayon, a struggle that is very private and no one can see it, they don't get the enormous help of the whole community, and it is much harder. So people who have private nisayons, whether it's a mental health issue, whether it is a financial issue, shalom bayis issue, problems with their children, which they don't want to advertise, that really they would love everyone to say Tehillim for them, everyone to bring meals for them, everybody to support them. I was always very frustrated that all my nisyonos was so public. One of the things I used to say to my husband is, everybody gets to have their nisyon in private, and I get to have all my nisyonos in public. And why is that? Why does my life have to be a fishbowl? So it has its advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages is that you do have an outpouring of the community, but there are some nisyonos that are private, and one of the reasons is because there's still stigmas in the community about different issues and different things, especially when it comes to mental health. And I would say exactly what Michelle said, which is reach out to somebody personally. Reach out to a mother, a sister, a Rebbetzin, a mentor, even strangers. I've had strangers reach out to me, people who have randomly heard a share of mine on Torah Anytime. They've emailed me or called me or found my number, and they've called me and cried on my shoulder, and I've tried to give them chizuk over the phone, and I've never met them in person. I just sometimes didn't even know their name. And they just need to reach out to a person, and they need to know that they're not alone. And like Michelle said, I just read an article that they said the suicide rate over the coronavirus period went up by 600%. 600%. That is a mad statistic. They said because loneliness and anxiety and all of that also leads to death. So coronavirus, yes, is life-threatening, but so is loneliness, so is depression, so is anxiety. All of this is also life-threatening. And we in the Jewish community, we are responsible for each other. And if somebody ever would reach out to me or to anyone on this panel, or really to anyone, even their neighbor, and say, please help me, I need help. Will you just listen to me? Can I have a cup of tea in your house? Will you help me in any, you know what? They would help you in a second. sometimes it's just about being brave enough to pick up the phone and say, I really just need a shoulder to cry on. And when anyone's ever done that to me, I have just been a shoulder to cry on, and there's no judgment, and there's no, I must know your name and where you're from and who you are and what you do. And just, you should know there are people out there who everybody wants to help, and everybody feels your pain with you, even if you're not public about it.
Yeah, I remember that just before we go, after I gave that talk a few months ago, it was the height when people were dying and people were not coping, and everyone was very ill. I gave the talk, and I said at the end, that point, that just pick up the phone, and a friend who I thought was the most amazing woman in coping rang me up in hysterics. I can't take it. I can't take my children. She continues to call me every weekend. We just chat, and that's really important, and she just needed to reach out and to speak to somebody, and it's tough on everyone. It's been tough on everyone this year, so you're not crazy for feeling anxiety or loneliness.
And when you reach out to somebody, then you feel not alone. That's what you feel. And that itself is a comfort. I just wanted to say that if anybody wanted to reach out to me, I'm on Instagram under Rebbetzin_SD. So Rebbetzin SD with like an underscore in the middle. If anybody wants to reach out to me, or if you have Facebook instead, SD Hamilton. If you want to reach out to me, I'm available. I'd love to speak with you or message you or whatever you need.
Okay, everyone, looking at the news, you all need to go and buy some toilet paper before Tesco runs out. So as the people crazy do, I'm not quite sure why, but it was a real privilege, and we really look forward to next week. Thank you, SD. Thank you, Khani.
Save Zoom details.
Pardon?
It's the save Zoom details next.
Yeah, and teleconference details as well.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Good night.
You can stay on if you want. Goodbye, everybody. 8 new messages. I think they're waiting for us to go off. They're going down.